Classic reprint series Zoroastrian Philosophy by Irach J.S. Taraporewala. Forgotten Books. Zoroastrian philosophy. Zoroaster had been renowned throughout the ancient world of Greece and Rome as one of the greatest sages of the world, and he was thus known to tradition all over Europe right up to the year 1771. In that year was published the first authentic translation of Zoroastrian scriptures by the Frenchman Anquetil du Perron. Nearly a century and 3/4 have passed since this first publication, and during this period much solid work has been done by great and devoted scholars in interpreting these ancient writings scientifically and critically. We need not go into the question of the date of Zarathustra. Throughout this essay, I have used the Iranian name of the prophet Zarathustra. It is enough to state that he was contemporary with sages of the earliest Vedic hymns of India. It is not the date that matters so much as the message that he gave to mankind. The prophet of ancient Iran was proclaiming the eternal truth, which has been proclaimed by all the great teachers and saviors of humanity. He speaks of the eternal laws of life laid down since the dawn of creation. His is a message addressed to all mankind of every age and every clime, and not merely to the people of ancient Iran at the particular period of their history. On account of this message, Zarathustra has been reckoned among the saviors of humanity from remote iniquity, and, indeed, his message has a lesson for even our 20th century. Of course, there had been great prophets and teachers before Zarathustra who had taught mankind the eternal law of God. As always happens in the history of the prophet, human beings have exceedingly short memories. Religious teachers teach us how to lead the true spiritual life, always a most difficult task. So human beings easily slip into ritualistic observances and ceremonial, which are ever so much easier to follow. And as time passes, we notice that this message of spiritual life gradually gets more and more dim. And at the same time, the name of the teacher is more frequently invoked and with ever growing vehemence. The net result is that men remember the messenger, but forget the message. The ceremonial and ritual branch out variously and give rise to mutually warring factions, and priests find a satisfactory means of livelihood by multiplying the ceremonial. Such was the state of religion in Iran just before the advent of Zarathustra. Thinking men and women were distracted amidst the warring factions, each upholding its own special deity as the only redeemer. The confusion is very finely described in the opening verse of the first Gita chant of Zarathustra, where distracted humanity, poetically named the soul of the cow or the soul of the Mother Earth, approaches the Supreme Creator and complains to him about the evils that encumber our earth. To you, the soul of the Mother Earth complained, "Wherefore ye gave birth? Who fashioned me? Passion, rapine, outrage everywhere, and violence enmeshed me all around. No other help than yours I see. Yea, lords, reveal to me a strong one, who can save." The Supreme Lord thereupon asked the great angels around him if they could name any soul who could undertake this task. They are unable to do so, and so the Lord himself named Zarathustra as the one person he would choose, because he is the only one who kept all our commands. After some hesitations, the soul of Mother Earth accepts as Savior. After this prologue in heaven, the prophet is born upon earth in the royal family of Iran, and he takes up the task and delivers his message, the message of the eternal law of God. This message is contained in the 5 Gitas of Zarathustra. These 5 Gitas, or chants, constitute the oldest portion of Zoroastrian scriptures and are rightly regarded as the fountainhead of the Zoroastrian religion. These chants have to be interpreted in the light of their own contents. Unfortunately, the earlier commentators have brought down the whole of this message to our earthly level, and so the teaching has been interpreted as the fostering of agriculture and the care of cattle. But we must not for a moment forget that the Gathas are spiritual in their contents and are to be interpreted as such. Read the things of the flesh with the eyes of the spirit, and not the things of the spirit with the eyes of the flesh. Okay, footnote 2. This is an ancient Aryan fancy. The same word, gav, is used to indicate cow as well as earth. The same imagery has also been employed extensively in the scriptures of India. 3. This translation, as well as other verses given elsewhere, are from my book, The Gathas of Zarathustra. Text with free English translation, Bombay, 1947. Fully realizing the impossibility of reconciling the mutually hostile worshippers of the various powers of nature, Zarathustra swept them all aside as of secondary importance. He was well aware of the ancient Aryan tradition and saw the one reality behind all these deities, the Supreme Being, whom the wise call by many names. He therefore enjoined the worship of the one Supreme Lord, of none besides. That Supreme Being was called Ahura Mazda. The name is a double name. It signifies the Lord of life and the Lord of creation. In other words, the Supreme Lord of the Spirit as well as of matter. The so-called dualism of Zoroastrian teaching is clearly seen in as a double name of the Supreme. The dualism of spirit and matter is the basic fact in our world. The prophet has recognized this basic fact, and at the same time, he has recognized that both spirit and matter have come from the one source, had one creator. The Supreme Ahura Mazda creates and sustains both spirit and matter. Necessarily, the Supreme Being is formless, and so he must be intangible to any of our senses and incomprehensible to our human mind. So there, Zarathustra revealed or explained him in his various aspects. The whole of his Gathas revolve around the prophet's teaching about the Amentia Spenta, the holy Immortals. They are not merely personified attributes of the Godhead, as many scholars such as Herto assumed them to be. Neither may they be compared to the archangels, as understood in other religious systems. They are best understood as aspects of the Supreme, or as rays from the central luminary. Footnote 4. This has been more or less the traditional interpretation of the Pahlavi commentators of the Sasanian days, 3rd and 4th centuries of Christ. An interval of at least 15 centuries separates these commentaries from the prophet. This was long enough to have made the latter writers forget the true inner significance of the Gathas, as they naturally interpreted these ancient documents in light of the beliefs they themselves held and the ritual and ceremonial they themselves followed. The greatness and depth of the prophet's mind is evident from the names as well as from the arrangement of these holy immortals. They are 6 in number, and the most remarkable point about them is that 3 of them are masculine in their nature and the attributes of the 3 are feminine. They represent respectively the father side and the mother side of the Godhead. What is more, these 6 together with the Supreme constitute a heptad. In the Gathas, these 7 have been invoked more than once as the Mazda Ahuras in the plural number, thus emphasizing the fact that they are all aspects of the Supreme Lord. In several of the later texts, it has been clearly stated that these 7 are ever of one accord, and that the thoughts and words and deeds are identical. The 3 holy immortals of the father side have been described in great detail to the prophet in the Gathas. This helps the ordinary human being to understand clearly and correctly the essential aspects of the Supreme. There has also existed a very ancient sacred verse, which tradition says in pre-Zoroastrian this verse has been regarded as most sacred in all Zoroastrian scriptures. In it, the 3 aspects of the father side have been mentioned by the name. This very verse is famous by the name of Hunaveria. The first Gatha of Zarathustra is sort of detailed explanation of this sacred verse and is named Gatha Hunaveti in consequence. The first aspect of the ray of Ahura Mazda is named Shah. This name has been translated as righteousness. It has to be understood in the higher spiritual sense as truth by Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount. The name implies truth, the eternal law of God. Truth is assuredly an aspect of God. When one realizes truth, one would also know what God is. Lord Tennyson, in the last stanza of his great poem, In Memoriam, has spoken of that God which always lives and loves, one God, one law, one element. and one far-off divine event to which whole creation moves. Footnote 5. Many scholars, notably Bartholomew, have thought that this sacred verse was compared after the time of Zarathustra. I personally am inclined to hold the traditional view that it represents the first word of God. This is very close to the idea of Asha, as given by Zarathustra. Asha therefore stands for truth, which is indeed God himself. The search for truth, to strive to realize it, is one of the ways to approach God. In one of the later texts which Orthodox Zoroastrians recited dawn, the aspirant prays, through the supreme truth, through the highest truth, may we catch a glimpse of thee, may we come near to thee, may we be in union of thee. This indicates the one far-off divine event to which the whole creation moves. Ashavaishta, the supreme truth, is also the name given to the sacred fire, which is kept ever burning in the Zoroastrian fire temples. Nowhere in the Avesta texts is the fire Atar to be understood in the sense of physical fire. It is always the inner fire of the Supreme, the Son of Ahura Mazda, found in the heart of every human being. The Gita is quite clear on this point. Thine inner fire, Ahura, to see we yearn. He blazes mightily through truth. He has thy strength. Our goal and hope is he. He lights the faithful clearly through life, but Mazda in the hearts of infidels. He sees the hidden evil at a glance. The fire in the fire temples represents also the divine spark within each human being, a spark of great fire who is God himself. The realization of Isha demands the pursuit of spiritual knowledge, and in the Gitas, very often, the name also implies the path of knowledge. It is strenuous pursuit demanding one point of devotion. The second aspect or ray of Ahura Mazda is Vohu Mano. This name is usually translated as good mind, but that seems to miss the essential point. There is an obsolete Aryan verb, vas, to love, from which is derived the first half of the name of Vahu. In the later text, the word Vahu does not mean God, but in the Gitas, it does not necessarily imply mere goodness. The rendering good mind is somewhat colorless, but loving mind is something far more definite. Vahumano is, in short, the love aspect of the supreme God is love. In the very first prayer Zarathustra utters in the Gitas, he expresses the wish, fain would I, Mazda Ahura, to you, reach up through Vahu, Man, devoted love. Okay, footnote 6. This Aryan vas remains unchanged in Sanskrit, but changes to va in the Avesta. The verb itself is not found in any text either Iran or of India, but several derivatives are known in both lands. In India, and the derivatives of the verb seem to have been degraded in sense, and there is an implication of illicit attachment in some of the derivatives. There are a few favored souls amongst us. To whom God has whispered in the ear, who can love the invisible and intangible God in the abstract? The average man, however, needs something visible on which to pour out his love. The love for God can be best expressed as the love for our brother man. This is the fundamental teaching of all great religions. As a matter of fact, on reading the Gitas, we get the impression that the whole teaching is based on Vahumano, or love, and it may be noted that in the latter text, Vahumano definitely stands in the first place. Immediately after Ahura Mazda, though in the Gitas, Asha occupies that position. Vahumano implies that not merely love of man, but his activity covers the whole living creation. In letter theology, his special province in the animal kingdom, particularly the creatures who are useful to man. The cultivation and the realization of love is best possible in the lives of the wedded pairs upon earth. Hence, wedlock has always been regarded as holy, for it is the first step along the path to God. In the latter text we read that a married person is dearer to Ahura Mazda than a unmarried one. This is a beautiful verse in the fifth Gita, which brings out this ideal of wedded bliss. These words I speak to maidens truly wed, and to their comrade young. Bear them in mind, and understand them deep within your souls. Bring down Vohuman in your lives on earth. Let each one strive, the other surpass, in Asha's truth and Vohumano love. Thus each one surely shall reap rich rewards. Footnote 7. On days of sacred Venerable, the 2nd, 12th, 14th, and 21st of each month, Orthodox Zoroastrians, though normally meat-eaters, abstain from flesh. Footnote 8. This verse is from the 5th Gita, which has been regarded by many scholars to be a wedding hymn. In the later text, this idea of love seems to have developed in another direction. Zoroastrians are enjoined to recite their prayers 5 times a day, with each of the 5 divisions of the day. Okay. Footnote 9. The day of 24 hours beginning at midnight. 1 lord of a social unit is associated. These lords are in order: 1, lord of the house; 2, lord of the village; 3, lord of the province; 4, lord of the country; and 5, the supreme teacher of the religion, Zarathustra. These 5 lords represent ever-widening circles of duties and love. The last, the supreme teacher Zarathustra, enfolds the whole of humanity in his loving embrace. Realizing thus both truth and love, one is not to rest content in his own attainment. He has to translate the truth and love he has attained into action, into loving service of humanity. This is the 3rd aspect of the Supreme, his Kshatriya. The name means power or strength of the Lord. This strength is derived from the Lord himself and inspired by love. Hence in the Gathas, the name Kshatriya often has the adjective Ohu attached to it. The action or service done be inspired by love. Such service brings reward to Kshatriya Vihura himself. In other words, the highest reward for service is power to render greatest service. Thus, the father side of the Supreme is summed up in these 3 aspects. In human life, these are the best expressed by the verbs to know, to love, to serve. The mother side also shows 3. Holy Immortals, but in the Gathas they are not treated in so much detail as the 3 on the father side. The first on the mother side is most important, and she is closely associated with Asha. Our Métis, usually translated Piety, is the first aspect of the mother side. Her name merely implies correct mental attitude. She represents firm, unshakable faith in God's eternal law and justice. She is implanted and dwells within the heart of each human being. She stands by and resolves our doubts as they arise. Zarathustra admonishes us to keep our ears open to hear her whisper in our hearts. In later theology, our Métis represents the firm, solid earth, typical of the inner, firm faith, which nothing can shake. The Zoroastrian, when initiated into the faith, chooses our Métis as a guide through life. And after death, the body is left in her loving arms, and the soul passes into her protection. The names of the remaining 2 holy immortals, Harvatat and Emeritat, means perfection and immortality. They represent the ultimate goal of the human life and endeavor. These 2 are regarded as the twins, always together, because the attainment of their perfection must bring immortality and the conquest of death. They represent the reward a man earns through his efforts to tread this path of the Shah. They bring as reward spiritual strength and life renewed, which are also regarded as the precious gifts of love, such as the wonderful and poetic teaching about the holy Immortals, through which Zarathustra strives to give mankind some idea of the essential nature of the supreme power. We may sum up this teaching thus: every human being must strive to understand the eternal law of truth and righteousness of Shah, and must try to realize it in his daily life. In order to do this, he must cultivate love, universal love, lumino, and realize it deep within his inner self. This truth and love, thus realized, must be next translated into acts of service, Kshatriya. Also, through one must hold fast to the firm and shaken faith or Métis, faith in the essential divinity and goodness of all creation, and thus one attains the perfection of immortality. However, taught and Emeritat becomes perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect and conquers death. Besides the holy immortals and the fire, Zarathustra has mentioned another deity in the Gathas. He is Sarosha, The name signifies obedience to the will of the Supreme. In the Getas, he is called the greatest servant of the Supreme. The obedience here implied is not the blind and slavish obedience of the fanatic, but willing obedience of the understanding mind. In later theology, Saoshyant ranks next after the holy Immortals. Zarathustra emphatically maintains that each one of us must discover the truth for himself. He has certainly claimed to be a teacher appointed by Hira Mazda, but he has never said that a person should follow a particular course of life and conduct because he has said so. His own words are quite clear and precise. Hear, your ears, the highest truths I preach, and with illumined minds weigh them with care, before you choose with of the two paths to tread, deciding man by man, each one for each. This is the charter of the spiritual liberty for all mankind. Man is given absolute freedom in the choice of the path he wants to tread, because he possesses the most precious gift of God, mind, which enables him to distinguish from good and evil. The problem of good and evil has been solved by Zarathustra in a unique manner, and that constitutes Zarathustra's greatest contribution to the religious thought of the world. His teaching is best given in his own words. The first created were the spirits of twain. As twain co-workers, they reveal themselves. Yet, in each thought and word, the deed, these two are ne'er agreed. One's good, the other bad, and of these two, the wise do choose aright. The unwise choose not thus, and go astray. And when together did the spirits twain foregather at creation's early dawn, life did one make, the other made not life, and thus creation's purpose is achieved. Dark is the mind of those that cling to false, but brightly shines the mind that holds to truth. Zarathustra has said in so many words that both good and evil have been created by Mazda. The essential characters of these twin spirits is revealed in what they have made. Life and not life. The negative form of the latter is full of deep significance. The evil spirit is the spirit of eternal negation. Goethe, in his Faust, has described Mephistopheles in the words which might have been taken straight from the Gathas, and Mephistopheles is a spirit that evermore denies. He claims as his own domain all elements which destruction, sin, or briefly evil name. And further, Mephistopheles says that he is part of the power that still produceth good, while ever scheming ill. This is exactly what Zarathustra is taught. The plan of God is ultimately every soul shall attain perfection and immortality. But this is to be achieved by each of one's own effort, and the initial choice is left absolutely free to each human soul. This freedom of choice necessarily implies full responsibility for all one's thoughts, the words, and deeds. And here we find the laws of karma, of action and reaction, stepping in. Zarathustra calls them the laws of happiness and pain, because, as he has explained, falsehood brings on age-long punishment, and truth leads to a fuller, higher life. The twin spirits indicate the fundamental difference between life and matter, not life. Between things heavenly and things mundane, the arch-deluder, the evil one, is ever at hand to delude mankind. When their ears are filled aloud with songs of earth, which drown the whisperings of Piety, in their hearts, lured by the deluder, and blinded by the earthly glitter, men become deaf to the call of Shah and of Ohomano, and dash along the path of wrath and hatred. Footnote 10. Desire for the joys of earth leads a person to strive to gain them. When frustrated in this attempt, wrath and hatred arise in his heart against those who have thwarted him, and thus do they pollute our mortal life. But the inexorable laws of happiness and pain never spare anyone, for none may deceive the omnipotent Lord. After death, souls have to pass over the judgment bridge, Shinvert Bridge, where their earthly lives are reviewed and rewards and punishments meted out. There, at the judgment bridge, the inner selves of sinners shall chide them as they fall. Punishment for evil is but the natural result of evil done. It is the law of God. Evil does triumph very often for a time, but in the long run, frustration awaits the followers of untruth. And all this triumphs are brought to naught by truth. From the moment shall his mind retrace its steps for. Then must thou, Lord of all, thy law supreme shall be revealed to them by Vohoman. Then, O Ohora, shall they learn, indeed, to give all falsehood into Asha's hands. Then, indeed, shall love replace their wrath and hatred in their hearts. After years of frustration, tribulation, and mental agony experienced in this abode of untruth, our earthly existence, the soul at last learns the great lesson that hatred is conquered by love alone. Once that lesson is learned, the upward progress towards the realm of light, the abode of Ohomino, is assured. Thus, even the worst sinner must, and ultimately does, attain perfection and immortality. There is hope for all, none shall be left out. In India, as natural corollary to this law of karma, the idea of reincarnation has been stressed, but no such stress on repeated lives on earth is found in any of the Zoroastrian scriptures. In fact, only one verse out of 239 in the Gathas, and indeed, out of all the Avestan texts, might be interpreted as speaking clearly of the return of this abode of untruth. Footnote 11 and 12. It would be fair to state here that any other scholars have translated both these verses very differently. So we may assert that the idea of the repeated births upon earth is nowhere emphasized in any Zoroastrian scriptures. This doctrine of rebirth, though quite logical, though and undoubtedly very comforting in our moments of distress, still does certainly tend to make a person somewhat slack. One is apt to imagine that the several lives still to come there need not be any occasion for strenuous effort. Zarathustra has all through laid great stress on the contrast strenuous action. In one of the Gatha verses, he says quite clearly, 12, within the space of this one life on earth, perfection can be reached by fervent souls, ardent in zeal, sincere in their toil. We can therefore conclude that we may infer the teaching about reincarnation from the other teachings of Zarathustra, but the idea of rebirth is not at all emphasized anywhere in the Avesta text. The three commandments of Zarathustra, good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, are often mentioned in the Gathas, and of the three deeds are specially stressed. Who strives to understand and reach true life should preach the laws of Mazdao to mankind, better by acts of service than by words. As long as the high ideals of Zarathustra's Gathas remained a living inspiration to the nation, so long Haran continued to prosper, and she became the mistress of the ancient world. But, as happens with every nation, in the course of time, these high ideals were forgotten. The prosperity following in the wake of a huge empire and the consequent riches that gathered in Iran led to the decay of the Iranian character. The pure and vigorous teaching was gradually replaced by the superstition and ritual. In the final phases of Zoroastrian religion in Iran under the Sassanians, 226-642 AC, the religion became full of complicated ritual and superstitious fear. This fear was perhaps necessary in preventing evil, but the teaching of love in the Gathas was far superior inasmuch as it inspired good. In later Zoroastrianism, this fear has become an obsession. Human life, from birth to death, and even beyond, meant an unceasing struggle against the demon host, and was regulated accordingly. This fear was the prime cause of the crumbling of the huge fabric of the Sasanian Empire at the first touch of the desert Arabs, inspired by the fresh and vigorous gospel of Mohammed. After the Arab conquest, the official religion of Iran changed, but not the spirit of the nation. The Arabs had conquered Iran, but not her spirit. Islam became the official faith of Iran, but the Iranian Islam was very different from Arabian Islam. The spirit of Iran blossomed forth in the wonderful mystic poetry of the Sufis, which reminds one of the teaching about Lohomano, as given by Zarathustra. The Zoroastrians who immigrated in India over 1,000 years ago have until now continued to practice the customs, rituals of the Sasanian days. Until then, living memory, practically all the ancient rituals were observed and enforced rigorously. To the impact of Western thought, however, has profoundly modified these old ideas of the Sasanian days. The Zoroastrians, both in Iran and India, had stuck to the traditional Pahlavi interpretations of the ancient Avesta scriptures right up to the 60s of the last century, when the great Zoroastrian scholar K.R. Gama taught some of the learned priests of Bombay the critical of law school methods which he himself had learned from Western Iranians. Kama labors helped considerably in removing many of the superstitions which had continued through many generations. Kama's pupils, in their turn, trained a new generation of scholars in India who have been working to reinterpret the sacred literature of their own religion in the light of the latest researches of Western scholars. Many of these younger scholars themselves have received training under the Western masters. It is now established that the fountainhead and the core of Zoroastrian faith is certainly to sought in the Gathas of Zarathustra. The labors of many scholars have enabled us to separate the original teaching of Prophet from the latter accretions that have grown up around it. Of course, the majority of Zoroastrians still cling to the old orthodox ways, but the younger people have begun to appreciate more and more clearly that the true teaching is to be found only in the Gathas. The clear movement has been inaugurated, emphasizing a return to the Gathas, and it lies the best hope for the future of Zoroastrians all over the world. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to support my channel, like, subscribe, hit the bell for updates on future videos. And with that, Ushte, thanks for watching.